Okay, picking up the fatal flaw. So Grant Hadwin goes off and has his experience while he's working, and apparently comes back a different person. And we left off in the last video. His coworker, Mr. Runts, was describing it. But what Runts didn't know was that while he had been away, Hadwin had a vision, like the monks who once roamed the deserts of the Middle East to the remotest outposts. Hadwin had ventured into the wilderness and received a message that he could not ignore. As the theologian Benedicta Ward wrote, the essence of the spirituality of the desert is that it's not taught, but rather caught. Hadwin was not searching for such an experience. It had come up behind him and clubbed him over the head. The episode passed as mysteriously as it had come, and Hadwin went back to working. And he continued to receive excellent work reviews, but his supervisor could see that something was different about him. So what they noticed about Hadwin was that essentially his heart wasn't in it anymore. He was performing the work. He was doing it to an expert degree of quality, but the work didn't mean anything to him. Another thing that people noticed about him, too, is at this point, he started to have some people working sort of as apprentices to him, like they were in the woods with him, sort of trying to keep up with him and learn from him. And they would go on to say that he seemed to be in tune with actual nature. He always knew exactly where he was, and animals would stay close by. He wouldn't spook animals. Now, that may have been the case before this episode. It's hard to say for sure because most people weren't out there with Grant Hadwin. But at this point, people were starting to go out, and they noticed that he was different. He seemed to be pretty in tune with nature, not in a strange way, but in the sense that he seemed very comfortable with it. But that his heart really wasn't in his work. Now, interestingly, Grant Hadwin had a brother, so he was one of two children. His brother Donald was a lot more like Grant's father. Grant's father was kind of a white-collar engineer, valued education, valued sort of being around the suburbs of Vancouver and doing a good job. And that's how Donald, his brother, came up too, went to good schools. But Donald was quite a few years older than Grant. So by the time Grant was becoming of age, when he was 16, 17 years old, I think Donald was already in his early 30s. There was a big gap between Grant and Donald. And Donald started to sort of struggle a bit psychologically, and he would eventually be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which is a pretty heavy diagnosis, a pretty serious disorder. And his brother Donald had a hard time keeping a job. He had a hard time keeping friends. And one night in February, after eating dinner at his parents' house, he walked across one of the main bridges in Vancouver. There's actually a picture of it, and he jumped off and he committed suicide. And it's hard to say how much this really impacted Grant, but I've had a chance to talk to a couple of people who knew Grant Hadwin. I know it sounds funny, but I was doing some research for Field Science when I first was doing this novel, and I'll spare you all the details, but I was able to get in touch with some of the people who were acquaintances or friends of Grant Hadwin, and I had a chance to ask him some questions, so I did. This is one of the things I asked him about. I said, with his brother committing suicide, did it really impact him? And I got some different answers. Some people said, no, I don't think so. And another guy, so I talked to two of his friends, another guy said, yeah, I really think it did. I think that's why he was a lot of the way he was. That's why he was wild. That's why he was, in the wilderness in the first place. The book kind of goes in, it's because his brother Donald went to college and was doing all the things to make his father proud, and this terrible disease comes and sort of swallows him up, and he commits suicide. And so Grant's like, I'm just going to go hang out with my uncle, and I'm going to do what I want to do. I want to do something really different than my father and different than my uncle is what I'm trying to say. So he kind of ventured off and got into logging and kind of made Grant who he was. A lot of his decisions, when he was younger, even the drinking and the passing out in snowbanks and stuff, a lot of that was sort of in reaction to what happened to Donald, at least according to the one friend I talked to. So this goes by, but things seem to really start to unravel for Grant here. The reason I bring up Donald is because people look back now and they wonder if Grant Hadwin was maybe having episodes of something similar, or maybe episodes of schizophrenia himself, because it can run in families and it can be genetic. And Grant's behaviors after this 1987 vision that he had out in the wilderness sort of well, they're bizarre. I'll tell you a couple of them. So in 1989, so it's like 2 years later, somebody vandalized his sawmill, the one he had in Goldbridge. He felt very paranoid about it. He was very paranoid that his neighbors had done it and that they were out to get him in some sort of way. So that was why he moved with his family to Kamloops. So he goes again from Goldbridge to Kamloops. In 1991, he divorces his wife Margaret. He was able to keep custody of the children. He goes on this really strange worldwide trip. So he leaves. He goes to Washington D.C. It's like the next time he shows up, and he's like passing out condoms and advocating for safe sex in Washington D.C. Then he goes to he shows up in Florida, so we're quite a ways from Kamloops now. He shows up in Florida, and he is handing out hypodermic needles to advocate for safe needle usage. Again, this is like in 1991. It's not unheard of, but a little strange for the time. And then he ends up going from Florida to Moscow. He makes his way across Russia. And very, very few people know everything he was up to out there. I mean, he was handing out needles and that kind of thing too. But a lot of people feel like he was also looking for work, because Siberia was one of the last great clear-cutting areas left in the world right now, where there's still a lot of standing timber that needed to come down. And many people think he went up to Russia looking to find work, freelance work, but it's hard to work in another country that you're not a citizen of, at least on the books. So he didn't really find what he was looking for there. When he came back, people were afraid of him, really. I mean, like, they were very concerned. They felt like he was really coming unravel. He left as like this, logging engineer guy, and he comes back and he has a baseball cap on with condoms and hypodermic needles, like literally attached to the baseball cap. And he's like walking around Kamloops like that. His friends were like, what is going on? It was becoming clear that he had changed, and some people really feel like it was clear that he was like unraveling at this point. There's this truck driver incident, like where he got into some kind of road rage thing with like a truck driver on the road. This is like talking like 18-wheeler. This guy tailgates him back to his house. They get out of the car. They get into they're getting into each other's faces. Grant grabs a 2x4 from the garage and hits this guy. Then as soon as the guy falls to the ground, Grant helps him to his feet. This is like at the time Grant was like. He didn't drive to his house. He drove to his wife's house because they were separated at this point. So his wife and the truck driver shoo Grant away, and he feels really bad about it. But that was actually his first brush with the law, and from that they put him on probation. But they also referred him to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation, and from there they put him on some low-grade antipsychotic medication. And it's hard to say if it was that or maybe just his internal cycle, but he really did improve. He found work. He was turning in reports for logging. And, he's kind of just being Grant Hadwin at this point. Like, his new employer asked him, hey, can we get an emergency contact for you? And he said, if I can't get out of the bush on my own, I don't want to come out. I want you to remember that quote for chapters that sort of come up here in the future. But he sort of returned to being like the Grant Hadwin that we know. There were some issues with him. Like, some people saw him around town, so he didn't look too well. Sometimes, other times, he kind of looked like himself. We're not sure if he was even taking the medications or how often he was taking it. Remember, Grant's a really private person, so people really aren't sure. But around this time, he meets a woman who he kind of refers to as like an aunt figure to him. Her name is Cora Gray, and she's the first one to take him to the Queen Charlotte Islands, which is Haida Gwaii. And around this time here, so she takes him to Haida Gwaii, and Grant, he's able to see Sitka spruces, but he also sees a ton of logging going on. So the logging around this whole region, guys, it wasn't the first time Haida Gwaii was logged. The logging around this whole region was for the Sitka spruces that stood there, and these were sought after because they used them first in World War I, because Sitka as a wood is very lightweight. It's like got this rare combination of strength and flexibility. It's ideal for making airplanes, and these were the airplanes they were using for flying in World War I. So they already had come in there and really taken a bunch of Sitka out. There was still some old growth Sitka left. And Grant had a chance to visit this place, and we're not sure what level of interest he took on it, but there was definitely something that he seemed to walk away with from this visit to Haida Gwaii. So get one quote for you. I got it. Okay, so this is in regard to how much lumber they were taking out. This is actually a report from 1919 from a West Coast logging company. They were a little more candid, I think, back then, but they said the supply of Sitka spruce suitable for airplane construction is extremely limited. And the continuance of cutting on a war basis for another year will have practically exhausted the spruce, which should be secured at a reasonable expense of money and effort. Only the large trees contain the clear, fine-grained lumber required, and these cannot be replaced in centuries. Most of the airplane material was cut from trees that were 500 to 800 years old, and it's doubtful if the succeeding stands will ever attain the same quality as these virgin stands. I thought that was a very honest assessment of what happens when you cut down trees that are 800 years old, and you just sort of expect them to grow back in any kind of reasonable time frame, especially if they're clear-cut. But anyway, that aside, on Haida Gwaii at the time, you guys, they had cut down, they're cutting down spruces like crazy, and they're taking them out of there, not for airplanes, but for all sorts of uses. And these are the two boats they were using to take out of there. One was called the Haida Brave, the other one was called the Haida something. I can't remember, but these boats, the way they work is they will use these cranes to load up their cargo of logs, and they ship them over, away from Haida Gwaii to the mainland, and they sell all this lumber. Most of it was going to Asia. A lot of the lumber we still take out of this region, guys, and a lot of the lumber we take out of Alaska goes to Asia, and some of it is bought at below market prices. In some cases, we're paying to cut the logs and send them over there. It's pretty crazy, but I'll save that for a different time. Grant, I'm sure, saw this. He was actually aware of these freighters heading out of here. Sometimes twice a day. People of Haida Gwaii saw it happening. People of Haida Gwaii, some of them were loggers, but it was still really hard to watch their whole forest go. But they saved this one little section. They saved it because there's a special tree in there, one that doesn't have green leaves. Now, you need chlorophyll to make sugars, to photosynthesize, but there was a tree that didn't. So they saved, I think it was only like 12 acres or something of woods around this one tree. And they wouldn't cut it down. The logging company wouldn't cut it down. And Grant Hadwin viewed this as remarkably disrespectful. Like, he thought that you're cutting down all of this wood, and you're taking all of this away from people, and yet you're saving one tree that's a bit of a freak. It's like a disease tree to him. Like, why would you even save this thing? So it says, but Hadwin saw something different. It was the same thing that many of the pragmatic colleagues saw, a sick tree. More than most people, he would have been struck by the contrast between the vestigial grove containing the town's mascot, the free-range saw log farm that surrounded it. To a person who knew the woods as well as Hadwin, it would have been jarring and ludicrous as an albino buffalo on a putting green. Where were all his healthy counterparts? They were headed south on the Haida Brave. So this is the Haida Brave. And Hadwin found this to be ridiculous, that these companies were getting away with cutting all of this timber down, but they're saving this one special tree. And he definitely took that with them. This is the size of the trees that were in that one little grove that they left. And this is a picture of the golden spruce that's in this one section they left. And Hadwin, it did not sit well with them. That's all I'll say about that for now.